So I realize I'm having a bad hair day, so I apologize for that. um, Today, I want to talk about fear again, and I love talking about fear and exploring it because fear, in my opinion, is fear is the doorway. Fear is the kind of the edge of where you can break new ground, where you can move into new domains, which is incredibly powerful. So fear is where the opportunity is my way of thinking. And sometimes I use the analogy of having an apartment or a house, and um, and that you think it's only a certain size, and then if you're able to get through a new realm of fear, it's like all of a sudden a whole new wing opens up, and there's this, it's like now you have this new domain or new playground that you can explore. So I want to share with share with you some ways that you can move through your fear or work with it in such a way that you can break new ground. That this is something that has been on my mind for most of my life, and like well before I studied NLP, I always I was always very curious by why I would be fearful in one domain and not in another domain. Like why would I get stuck walking down one road metaphorically and not in another? And also, why was it that I was like very comfortable in certain domains where other people were fearful? And then obviously the other way around. For years it really frustrated me that I was completely terrified of public speaking, and yet I had this friend who would really thrive and come alive in any sort of public speaking or performing. Um, so that's the topic of this talk, and there are a couple points I want to make, which are things that you can play with, you can explore, you can practice, and hopefully open up a new domain for yourself. The first thing always is to notice, where am I frightened? Like, where is that border, and what is the category? What's the name and what's the category? So, in the example I just gave, it was public speaking, it was playing music in front of people. Um, so that was a clear domain, and so my nervous system would light up with fear anytime I was in a situation that I sort of labeled or coded in that way. Um, so if I had to give a talk in a class growing up, I would get terrified. If I had to play music in front of people, I would really just, shrink. So, that was one domain. Now, some people will have fears similarly to that, like it can be interviewing, it can be test taking, um, certainly social situations for many people. For many people, it's, talking to somebody at a social gathering or a networking event can be very fearful. So, the first thing is just notice what is the category? What are the conditions that will invite fear to sort of light up in your nervous system? Um, and one that I noticed, besides public speaking, was I definitely had a fear of heights, and um, and I remember several cases where I would um, I would try to dive from a high place or jump from a high place, and I would really like completely freeze up. And I remember this one time where, I think I was probably 13 or 14, and I was away at camp, and we went to this Olympic diving pool that had the different diving platforms. And even from the low one, I would get really scared. And then there were two more levels higher. And the thing that really blew my mind was, um, I would go up and I would completely freeze up. And there was this there was this little girl there, and she must have been maybe 6 or 7, so she was half my age, and she just loved it. So she would just run up the ladders and to the highest one and just jump off. And the amazing thing was it was so high, it was like 30 feet up in the air. It would, like, the water would smack her arm, and I remember her arm got like very red, so which hurt. It hurt her, and yet she was still just so excited about jumping that immediately she'd be up the ladder and jump again. So that really perplexed me. And um, there was this there was this river, like most kids, you have some place in your town where you go jump into water, on a river. And this place, we would go to this river, and on either side of the river, there were these rock ledges, and we would get up there. There were points at different heights, and you could jump off. And I remember that when I would go to jump, um, and you did have to aim, so there was a little bit of fear in that. Like, if you jumped way off, you would hurt yourself. It would be too shallow. But it was a relatively straightforward and easy jump. And but I would get up there, and my whole body would freeze with fear, and it was very hard for me to get myself to jump. So this is the first thing that I would recommend is, once you've identified the context, you want to try to find the place that's right at the edge of your fear. So for me, I think the place that I was jumping from was probably about 15, or let's say 15 feet high, and you had to jump out a little bit over a rock, so that was a little bit scary too. Now, there I would completely freeze up. So it actually would have been better for me to jump from a little bit lower to the point where the fear was a little bit more manageable. And but in this case, this higher place, um, I got very scared, but I could get myself to jump, so that was good. And I would I would just be terrified, and I would just kind of force myself to jump. So that was a bit of a brute force approach. Now, I will say, let's say you you have a high level of fear, but you can somehow brute force yourself to do the thing. Um, that would be the most basic method, and that's where you would start. And then you want to train your nervous system by doing it many, many, many times till your nervous system starts to realize, I don't need to be afraid here anymore. You're training your nervous system to, in this case by brute force, to just keep doing it until your nervous system starts to get a little bit bored with the whole thing. Now, what I did as sort of an interim step was, it was interesting. I would get up there, and I would stand right at the edge, ready to jump, and I would notice what the fear felt like, and then I would take a moment, and I would completely calm myself down so that there was no more fear left in my body, and then I would jump. Now, this is interesting from a NLP perspective, because what you're trying to do is train your body to have different feelings when around that stimulus. So, I would say instinctually that I was trying to go for the same thing. The funny thing that would happen is all the fear would be out of my body, and then literally the split second that I would jump, all the fear would come back. But that's okay. At least I was able to do it, and then I could brute force it by doing it again and again and again. Um, and, and then you'll notice, like, okay, now this level is no longer fearful for me, or the fear is no longer anywhere near what it used to be. And then you can start to ratchet up from there. And now you have a game. Now you can keep improving and improving and improving. Now, one thing that's really important is to really acknowledge your progress, and realize, like, okay, in that case, I got used to jumping at 15 feet, so maybe I could go to the next place and learn how to jump there. Now, if I don't keep track of that progress, my awareness is always going to be on where I'm afraid, excuse me, where I'm afraid now, which isn't isn't going to be that useful to me because I'm just going to feel like a fearful person. However, if I notice, oh, 15 feet used to be fearful, it's no longer fearful. If you keep noticing those checkpoints, you're training your nervous system and your cognitive mind to realize, like, okay, each step I get acclimated to, and I can keep going further and further and further. Now let's bring this into the realm of, say a social fear. So if maybe you're somebody that you completely freeze up at a networking event, what I would recommend in that case is to do the same thing. First, acknowledge the context. Like, okay, this is a context where I completely shut down, and see if you can identify a level of challenge that you can at least do through brute force, even feeling afraid. Like maybe it's let's say you're at a networking event and you're terrified to speak with anyone. So you give yourself a task like asking somebody where the restroom is, and it helps if you really don't know where the restroom is, so that it's a real question. Or you could, think of a little challenge that, just asking one person their name or who invited them, something very at a level that you can deal with the fear and get the words out. And as soon as you're done, acknowledge yourself and, put a check. And then you want to keep practicing that step until that becomes easy. And then maybe next time you stretch it out to like asking a person, a question about themselves, and doing that again and again and again. And you want to do it until your nervous system can calm down in that realm. And even though this is sort of a brute force approach, I find it's incredibly effective. Like there's I would say very little that's more empowering than knowing that you were fearful in a context and then you've gotten yourself to do it anyway, which is better than never confronting it. In my way of thinking. So identify just that teeny challenge and notice the fear, feel it in your body. Just go, okay, I'm feeling some jitters. That's okay. That's like excitement, right? There's this idea that fear and excitement are almost identical in the nervous system. I don't know if I agree completely, but certainly something to check out. Notice the fear and then walk and see if you can get the words out. Now notice I said start with a really small step that you can do. This isn't about going and asking for a raise when you're terrified. It's finding the steps that allow you to build up to that. When I was dealing with public speaking or performing, it was very challenging because I would get terrified in the smallest circumstance. So one of the things that I did was I decided that I would go play music out in the park so that I could start really far away from people. And so I just sit there on a bench as far away from everyone as I could be. I was still a little nervous because there were people in the area. And then occasionally somebody would walk by me and I would get a little more nervous, but then it would subside. And I committed, I'm going to do this a certain number of hours. And little by little, I trained my nervous system to keep playing, even though I was afraid. And for me, that was the thing that really broke the ice on getting over fear of public speaking, among other things. But I think that was one of the major contributions to that. So pick a context where you're afraid. Notice what is the context, like how are you saying, this is the realm where I'm afraid. And then find your edge where you can just begin to have just enough fear that you can still do something, and then keep doing it until you can train your nervous system to calm down there. And I think you'll find that it's amazing the level of freedom that it brings to you. So I wish you well in that endeavor. Yeah.